I believe there are some family members present that the state would wish to give victim impact at this time. Would you like to do that?
Yes, Judge.
All right, do you know who you have to speak?
There are quite a few of them.
Okay. Mr. Brown, correct?
Mr. Richard Brown.
Mr. Richard Brown, yes, sir. What would you like to tell us?
Well, I'd like to tell you about my family.
Okay.
Okay. I'm not going to sit here and talk about the Bible or Romeo and Juliet. I want to talk about the Brown family.
Okay.
Okay. So the Brown family, which consists of my mother, Patricia Brown, sitting in this courtroom, Marie Brown, the older sister, who is sitting in this courtroom, myself, who sits before you, or stands before you, and my little brother Roger, who unfortunately was sick and could not make it. But we are all here from New Jersey after over 3 years of living pain that only others that we hug and cry with could only understand. So, my name is Richard Brown, Greg's younger brother. Our mom, Patricia Brown, sitting there, squeezed 5 kids into a small house one day where we were children. These were the good old days for us. Most kids today wouldn't even hear of such a thing as squeezing 5 kids in one little house, but they have no idea what they missed out on. Greg was the second oldest after Marie, and it was the middle. I was the middle, followed by Mary Ann Brown and Roger Brown. As a child in our family, I remember the small hallway in between 2 bedrooms. One for the girls, one for the boys. We were little kids. We were upstairs. My mother was downstairs. She was all alone. We had no father. We know poverty just like everyone. We drank that powdered milk. We had reduced lunches. We had all of those things. We had no lavish lifestyle. As a child in our family, we had these 2 rooms, and going over the line was off limits. It could actually result in some serious hair pulling. Boys in one room, girls in the other. Our life is what we had. We had little, but one thing that we did have was we had each other. 5 children and a mother that we loved so much. Greg was the oldest boy and certainly helped to fill the role of our missing father. He showed me and my brother, Roger, the ropes, teaching us about mechanical work, teaching us about electrical work, and always demonstrating a strong work ethic. All of us kept care of each other, sisters and brothers, all united. We were a family of shared experiences and deep values. I remember our childhood as altar servers at St. Rose. He taught me how to make a flamethrower out of pledge polish, taste nasty sour wine, and trick us into ringing those communion bells at the wrong time. We were all comrades, but the only comrade that ever got caught was poor Greg at these little things. We did the normal sinister kid stuff, and my mom continued to bring us up 5 children on her own and did a great job keeping all of us on the straight and narrow path, instilling values that we maintain today. Greg later became the first cool kid with a car in our family. Instead of taking preference to drive his other cool friends around. His preference was to include even his little brother, 6 years younger, or 5 years, so that he could hang with the cool kids, because that was Greg's kind of love for his sisters and brothers. Now that he had a car, he could work 2 jobs. One day, my little brother learned that during Christmas time, Greg used to use his own money to make sure that we had a good Christmas. He said to my mother, "Mom, Roger's only 8. He needs to have a good Christmas with real toys." Compassion and service to others was in our family's name, and it was paramount to my mother. It was the most important thing, more than money, more than luxuries that we could never have. She would be the first one to volunteer her little army of kids to dig holes, break up concrete, cut your lawn, pick your dandelions, shovel snow. Nothing was off limits. The neighborhood was happy because the Brown kids would always help. The Brown family was always on standby to help without any question. Greg never forgot these values and continued to put people before himself. He had the softest heart of all of us. Greg, Maggie, and Megan were our family members. They were loved, and they had the same rights as any other human being to live, to love, and to feel loved by others. For over 3 years, our family has had to play through these murderous events in our heads over and over and over again. Nightmare after nightmare, because the defendant systematically took all of this and their humanity away one at a time. Let me detail my nightmare for the court. Maggie, a strong woman with an attitude. They owned a farm. "You better not be lazy around her farm." That was the first sentence that came to my mind when I wrote this. She was a hard worker, and she never had anything herself either. Her inner strength comes from an extensive line of experiences, hardships, and all the other things life throws at us during a lifetime like every other human being on this planet. At over 50, it was now her turn to enjoy some of her life and enjoy her grandchild. Once again, a monster decided on his own that Maggie did not deserve to live, although the defendant has had the full protections of the judicial system and now may live. That night, the defendant appointed himself the executioner of humans. Maggie never had a chance to defend herself against the monster from sneaking up behind her like a coward with a bam to the head with a hammer as hard as possible, until her head was so smashed up, he ultimately revealed her brain matter. The defendant has said in his own testimony that he wanted to contain the blood and brains in a bag to lessen the cleanup. Nick. The defendant is responsible for the bludgeoning and destruction of a human face to the point of it becoming the unidentifiable remnants of what used to be a human. A human that had inherent right to live like all of us, to be happy in life, and maybe even have children of his own someday. Instead, the defendant made sure that this could never happen as the hammer slowly pounded away until it was pulp, so that his mother, father, sister could not recognize him. This, to me, was one of the worst crimes against humanity I have ever seen in my 25 years of law enforcement. Megan. I can see Megan holding Tristan as the gun was aimed for her head to shoot her in the face in front of her son. I wonder how close that bullet came to that scared little boy's head. Was he spared because he could not talk as a witness? How many times did the defendant ignore her pleas not to kill her son? Isn't that how it really happened? Sure it is. Greg, with blood and brain matter on the defendant's hands, the killing spree is not over yet. The murderous rampage continues by hunting through the house to find Greg, feverishly trying to defend the people he loved the most, with the only thing that he owned: unloaded rifles stored high atop a shelf where they would be safe from his grandson away in a closet. In my nightmares, I see him trembling and shaking to find and load his rifles, his hands shaking so much he is hardly able to get a shell into his gun to defend his family. To this day, I can feel the helplessness and shock of these murders as they were unfolding right in front of him. Again, the defendant walks up behind Greg and bang, shot him right in the back, just about killing him as he slumped over and fell, facing Mr. Matos again. But bang, shot him again to finish the job, to make sure that he was lifeless. After all of this, it's time to open up a 6-pack of beer, smoke a pack of cigarettes, and play video games, isn't it? Because finally, the house is quiet. After all, they're all dead. The next few days were spent cleaning the house, wrapping up, tying up, bagging up our relatives for their final resting place. So ingenious of the defendant to figure out how to load 4 lifeless human bodies into a vehicle with dollies and ropes and pulleys or whatever. And in the process, dropping them sometimes on the floor because the makeshift winch did not work correctly. So a new plan would have to be developed to figure out a new way to get them into the vehicle, all while whatever blood was left in their bodies seeped out of their bodies to add to the existing post-mortem smell already permeating the neighborhood. And finally, the defendant drove them to a dirt pile where they were dragged out of the vehicle one by one like human garbage. Dragging each one of them out of the van, systematically they were placed head to toe because you were even so lazy to even put a pile of dirt with a new shovel that you purchased on top of their bodies. Instead, animals feasted on our loved ones in 100-degree weather, allowing maggots to slowly live off whatever flesh was on their bodies until there was nothing left to even identify them. It was as if these bodies were a result of a war crime in Syria. It was yet another crime against humanity committed by Mr. Matos, and you almost got away with it. Right until the very end, the defendant purposely lied to the jurors hours before they were about to deliberate, but these lies were quickly thwarted once again. The defendant came to the stand, faced the jury. This was the moment that victims were waiting for, to finally hear the truth and remorse. We waited in these pews in anticipation, after all these years of lies that were made up, conspiracies, to finally hear the truth and some remorse in the defendant's words. Instead, lies, 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 never the truth. Right till the very end, in a desperate measure, the defense would want everyone to believe no one suffered. They just got tapped in the head with a hammer and died instantly. I can only say, wow. During this week and any time in the future, anyone with a moral compass and common sense could certainly see through these lies. Desperate lie after desperate lie led everyone to believe anything but the gruesome truth. When the defendant finally took the stand, what did the victims hear? More lies, coupled with not even a hint of remorse to the victims sitting right in front of you. I wonder how could this be possible, not to show remorse after telling a jury how you shot my brother in the back, put bags over heads, and used hammers to make hamburger out of human faces. For 1 second, I thought, you may say the word sorry. To the victims, instead again, the choice was just more lies over remorse. So no remorse, no sorry, nothing. For this, you obviously are not a part of humanity and have no place in our society. Finally, our family also thinks about all the police, the first responders, medical examiners, and the jurors themselves, and the prosecutors, and you, Judge, who have endured viewing our loved ones piled up, smashed up, decomposed, and riddled with maggots. Our family, being the way that they are, hopes and prays that these public servants can put these images behind them and someday clear their heads of this horror scene. Our family also prays that someday we can wipe our tears and move on with our lives without this haunting us night after night after night after night.
Thank you, sir. Good afternoon, ma'am.
Good
You
afternoon.
can state your name for the record.
I am Marie Brown Mulder. I am Gregory's sister, Maggie's sister-in-law, and Megan's aunt.
Okay. Yes, ma'am.
First of all, Your Honor, thank you for allowing me this opportunity to read my victim's impact statement. For 3 years, their deaths have dominated our thoughts and our lives. I cannot adequately describe the pain, horror, and overwhelming despair experienced because of one person's actions. Of the loss of so many hopes, dreams, and expectations of so many people affected, including his own son. Gregory was our soft-hearted, internally giving brother. He was amazingly patient and unselfish. He became the man in the house at 16. During his summers, he would work 80 hours a week just to help make ends meet. He never complained, and never in his life did he feel sorry for himself, nor did he use it for an excuse. He met Maggie when he was about 19. Michael, Maggie's child from her first marriage, was about a year old. From the moment he held him, He was his son, unconditionally. Maggie and Greg went on to have 2 more children, Aaron and their princess Megan. He adored them, and he also adored his nieces and nephews, but the second love of his life was Tristan. My brother wrote on Facebook on their anniversary, "So I met a girl, and after we went on our first date, I told my mom I was going to marry her. She has been my best friend now for 34 years. She is a beautiful woman, caring mother, and a loving grandmother. A giving and understanding woman, even through rough times. Thank you, Maggie Brown, for the best years of my life, with many more to come. I will always love you and be there for you. Here's for another 34 years." Greg was what you would call a good person. He loved his children unconditionally, adored his wife. He had his deep faith in God. He loved hunting, fishing, the farm, and just being with friends and family. He worked very hard all his life and always did the right thing. He made you special, specifically loved, and cared for. He would be the first to help anyone, even strangers if he saw a need, shying away from recognition. From as a kid, when it snowed, shoveling out people on the way to school, to as an adult, he would get his tractor out and do the same for people he didn't even know. This is the person that you murdered. Maggie was quick-witted, straightforward, and still fragile at the same time. Always hopeful and would let nothing get in her way if she thought something was a good idea. She teased my brother unmercifully and loved him deeply. I can still hear her yelling, "Brown," or "old man." She was strong, capable, and loving. She taught me a lot about myself, tempered my anxieties as a new mom, and always had open arms during times of trouble. Maggie and I were stay-at-home moms. We raised our children a block from one another. Along with her sisters, we tag teamed for grocery store runs, doctor appointments, or just folded laundry together. There was always a house full. Between Maggie, her sisters, and myself, I think we may have had 9 kids under 5 running around at any given time. This is a family that was in and still is in each other's lives daily. As new mothers, we shared the struggles, laughs, and ironies of life. Husbands that annoyed us, children needing stitches, bills that needed to be paid. Now I can't say remember when to her, but we will remember, and we will make sure her sons and grandchildren know. Megan Elizabeth. She was our stunning tomboy, a natural beauty, athletic, loving mother, and of course, Daddy's little girl. Everything she did for her son. She left a full ride at Penn State for track because of Tristan. She took jobs around Maggie and Gregory's schedule so Tristan would always have people around him that loved him. Tristan was the center of her world. She did not strive for a career, even though she could have easily. Instead, she focused on her son, his diet, schooling, at-home activities. They were always a priority to her. She would rather bake cupcakes with him than go out with her friends. She even journaled her son's progress daily, what he ate, his milestones, what she wanted to work on with him. My brother and Maggie also used these journals to capture his day. They were his caregivers, his world. Maggie and Greg have 2 sons, Michael and Aaron, that survived. Gregory has 4 brothers and sisters. Maggie has 6 brothers and sisters. Megan leaves behind 2 brothers, all these aunts and uncles, and 20 cousins, in a family where your cousins were raised to be your brother and sister, your best friends, your aunt and uncles, substitute parents at times. Imagine watching each one of these loved ones suffer, seeing your mother, your siblings, your children nieces, nephews, Maggie's parents, her sisters and brothers, Megan's cousins, all in so much pain, feeling hopeless and helpless at the same time, not being able to talk about it for fear of hurting them. What could we possibly say to Michael and Aaron? They lost their father, mother, and sister. They lost most of their family because of this one selfish act. Maggie, Gregory, and Megan will never be able to see their children, grandchildren, be at weddings, or just talk to them on the phone. Another twisted effect because of your actions is how friends either say too much, nothing or all, or just avoid you because this is so devastating that they don't know what to say. Now imagine going through this with your entire support system destroyed at the worst time in your life. As for Tristan, Adam, you claim to love him. He's your whole world. Yet you took his world. You killed his 5'2", 52-year-old grandmother by bludgeoning her. And if that wasn't enough, you put over a bag over her head to make sure she wouldn't make a mess. You testified to this without feeling, as you did with all their murders. We imagine their pain every day. Adam, you took the life of Nick. You beat him at least 21 times with a hammer. I timed it. It took a long time. A lot of rage and effort. You took his life because he was there. But he was there because you threatened Megan. You then hunted down my brother and shot him in the back. To make sure he was dead, you shot him a second time. This man who took you in, who treated you fairly, and would only help, never hurt anyone. You coldly and without conscience killed him. We think about him every day, every minute, what his last thoughts were, and if he saw his daughter died. And all this you killed him in front of Tristan. Megan, the mother of your child, this alone shows how little you really care about Tristan. I absolutely believe this was in front of Tristan as she begged for both of their lives. I was at that house for 3 days after it was released to help pack up their personal belongings with their sons. It was over 100 degrees in there. We saw the blood splatter, the smears. We smelled the decomp. We saw Maggie's handprints on the walls while she struggled to get away. I straddled the hole in the closet when my brother died to get what was left of their belongings. At that time, Nick's sister arrived at the house and quietly asked to see where her brother died. What was left of my heart was broken. She sees the hole in Megan's floor, the bullet hole in the wall. He died with my family. Such an intimate event with a person I never met. The worst part was the east garage. I brought with me a bottle of holy water from where Gregory was baptized. Praying, I sprinkled over the very wet, very large pool of blood where their bodies were stacked in the garage. The detectives did try to spare us by putting paper over it, but it just bled through. On the walls were more blood, handprints, blood splatter. Yet you sit and testify how not sorry you were, but how you loaded them in the car. The house told the story. We could not escape what happened. What is worse is that you carelessly threw their bodies into the woods. For days we tried to get health, dental, surgical, skeletal records, anything to identify their bodies, reliving what little we knew with each conversation, begging the stranger on the other end to help us. None of this material helped. Their bodies so severely decomposed, rotting in the Florida sun, while the animals did their damage. This would not allow it. Not only did you murder them, you desecrated their bodies. You made it so that we would not be able to see our loved ones before we buried them. We couldn't even bring their bodies home. this was even taken from us. 3 years later, I still have nightmares. Just because Tristan has autism doesn't mean he doesn't know what happened and who's responsible for his mother and grandparents' death. In fact, in the 3 years since this nightmare, Tristan's ability to communicate has blossomed. He is able to tell the story as he experienced it in clear language. Tristan relives that trauma, and will for the rest of his life, just as we will. But Tristan will grow up within these wonderful families, remembering his mother, but terrified of you. He will grow up surrounded by people who adore him, care deeply for him, and would never hurt him. He will thrive, he will be happy, and he will be totally loved without you. Lastly, I would like to thank Your Honor, the court, the lawyers working on this case. I would especially like to thank the police officers, Detective Kugel, Kennedy, and the numerous professionals that brought us here today. I would also like to thank Deputy Keebler for helping us during this time.
Thank you. Good afternoon, ma'am.
Good afternoon.
Your name, please?
Amber Pyle.
Last name?
Pyle, P-Y-L-E.
I got it. All right, Amber?
Okay.
What would you like me to know?
So I am Amber Pyle, niece of Margaret Brown, my Auntie M, Gregory Brown, and cousin to my best friend Megan Brown. I did not write an impact statement for myself, nor will I. I just can't bring myself to spew my emotions out to you. You know how I feel about you because you've known what you've done. I am writing solely the impact on what you've done to your son Tristan. I once was Tristan's cousin, but I now legally am his sister. My mother, Rebecca Thomas, is now legally his mother. You should know this. You signed the papers to allow my mother to adopt him, and thank God for that. We, as in my entire family, my aunts, my uncles, my cousins, grandparents, we adore him. We get to watch him grow. We get to listen to his infectious laugh, and we get to see his bright, beautiful smile. We get to see his schoolworks, his projects that are posted up all around our house, in whatever spot he chooses, because he is our king. And we, in fact, will never do anything to hurt him or put him in harm's way. He is loved, he is special, and he has a family. We're trying to fill the void that he feels with the loss of his best friend, his mother, as well as his grandparents. I'm sure that you would like to think that with his autism, Tristan would be able to forget that what you've done, but I promise you he is not. He tells us daily what he saw and what he remembers. He tells us things along the line as, Daddy made a boo-boo on my mommy's head, and there was a lot of blood. And he tells us things like, and then he put them in a car and they were all gone, and he never saw them again. He tells us how scared he is of his father, that he is a bad man, and I tell him, Tristan, I agree. I hug him and I get to console him. You do not. He makes my mother promise him, when they say their prayers every night, that she will never leave or hurt him. He is terrified of you, Adam. So I hope when you put your pillow on the bed to sleep at night, you know that your son that you loved and tried to keep safe no longer does feel safe when he thinks about you. He in fact tells us he does not. He has told us on countless occasions that my daddy is in jail and he will never get out and he can never hurt me. Or tells us that my daddy made boo-boos on my feet when he made me walk for so long. That would be referring to when you made him run out of the house without shoes, causing large painful blisters on the bottom of his feet that my mom had to tend to once he got back to New Jersey. He tells us how thirsty and how hungry he was when he was with you. There's things that remind him of his other mommy, as he calls her, referring to his beautiful, loving mother, Megan. Certain food, certain snacks, certain juices, he'll smile from ear to ear saying, my other mommy used to give me this. It breaks my heart that he has to refer to the person that he loved the most in this world and the person who loved him the most in this world as his other mommy. I saw Megan with Tristan more times than I can count, and I can only pray that one day I could be half of a mother as she was. There is not a single day that goes by in my life that I don't think about my family that left the world at the hands of a murderer. There is not a single day that goes by that your son does not think about his family that he lost at the hands of a murderer. He loves his mother, he loves his grandparents, and he loves us. He does not love you. He saw what you did, he heard what you did. You did not keep him safe, and you did not care about him. You stole his whole world. You ruined his whole life, and we are here to pick up the pieces. We love him. Thank you for the gift of Tristan. Thank you.
Good afternoon, ma'am.
Good afternoon.
You can step up.
Judge Hansel.
Your name, ma'am?
My name is Paula Rystrom.
Okay, Ms. Rystrom, what would you like to tell me?
I'd like to thank you for allowing me this opportunity.
No problem.
Nicholas Allen Leonard, my son, my only son, was born on the morning of April 29th, 1977. My only beautiful son. To lose our son this way has caused unimaginable pain to our family. The worst that can ever happen to a mother has happened to me. I grieve for my son's lost future, for Nick's baby sister, Danielle. Nick was her loving big brother, her protector, her best friend, her confidant, her closest ally, a sidekick like no other. Now her guardian angel. How I wish I could take away her pain. I can't take away that pain. The year after Nick's murder, he missed her wedding to Michael. He never saw the man he was so happy and relieved she had finally found. Michael Shoup, Nick's would-be brother-in-law, the man who so graciously would ultimately identify Nick's rotting corpse on that roadside to spare our family the pain of seeing our son in death, a son-in-law we are eternally grateful to have. Michael and Danielle will never have an opportunity to be an aunt or uncle to Nick's children because you took that away from him. Or have him as an uncle to theirs. Nicholas never got that chance to experience fatherhood. I promise you, he would have been the best father given the chance. I grieve for Nick's father, Dan Leonard, who taught him to succeed in his life by using his hands and his heart to bring beauty to this ugly world. A father who taught Nick to take pride in his work. The father whose life was saved several years ago by Nicholas when he suffered his heart attack, and thankful Nick was close by to restore his life that day. The father Nick wanted to be just like. The father who wasn't supposed to survive his son. I grieve for Nick's grandparents, of which my father recently joined Nick's paternal grandparents in his heavenly home. My father, who struggled daily to remain healthy with one kidney he was born with in constant failure, to which Nicholas offered his own to extend his grandfather's life, died with a broken heart over his first grandson's murder, and only murdered relative in our family, never to see justice here on earth in his lifetime. And for my mother, the woman who called him Nicky Pickles. Nick was her favorite, her first grandson, who always made her laugh. This grandmother, still living in Wisconsin, in the care of Nick's Uncle Marty, my brother Jonathan Martin Rystrom, battling the thrones of dementia that robbed her of her memories. My mother was told that day they found the bodies. We lost Nick with his girlfriend and her parents, to which my mother said through her tears, "That sounds like it was a horrible car wreck. We had to leave it at that." My mother was never told of the death. It breaks our hearts when in her unlucid moments she asks, "How's my Nick?" We always tell her Fine, Mom. Really, really good. We must lie to her so we don't the routine that sustains her life. I grieve for his aunts, uncles, and heartbroken cousins whose lives are forever shattered by this deeply painful, senseless, evil murder spree. I grieve for Nick's countless friends and our friends, our lifelines who loved him dearly, those who Nick would drop everything on a call for help. I grieve for the Hudson community, Nick's home, and home to Nick's employees and his business associates he worked for and with. I grieve for Nick's customers who made it a point to come to my home upon his death to tell us how saddened they were, to say how his hands had touched their homes. Nick was so much more to them than just a carpenter, a handyman. He was a trusted friend who treated their homes as his own, a son they would proudly call their own. I grieve for the many veterans Nicholas assisted with the basic needs of life, to help them with a ride to the VA for medical appointments they could no longer get picked up for, or those that just needed to get out of the cold for a night who Nick provided a hot meal, a warm shower, a good night's rest, while Nick laundered their clothing or gave them his own when necessary. To honor them was a tribute to his Grandpa Leonard's military service, to Nick's elderly neighbors, Joni, Jack, and Ralph. Ralph, you heard from his son Robert. They counted on Nick to help repair their homes when they couldn't themselves, or run to the store, tend to the clothes, to the chores they no longer could handle. Nick provided hot home-cooked meals or just a jar of salsa made with love from his own hands, from a vegetable garden he tended to. Nicholas took pride in sharing and giving of himself to those in need, a hero to many. And lastly, the many women who came to me after Nick was murdered to share their stories of how Nicholas fearlessly rescued them from their own violent situations. Nicholas went the extra mile to help them and their children by opening his home while finding affordable housing, furnishings, food, and toys. Nick made sure they had everything needed to sustain, free of their abusers. This was my loving son, my caring child, nurturing, honorable, compassionate, deeply respected, and very much loved son. He didn't deserve to be brutally broken, bludgeoned to death, and dragged like trash, hidden on the roadside with the woman Nicholas described as the love of his life, Megan, along with her parents. Over dinner on what I would find out later was the eve of Nick's death, he told me, "Megan is one amazing woman, Mom, and you will love her and her family when you meet them." That day never came. The day I was informed of his death, the body stacked to rot in the elements for a week, with the animals eating and tearing at his open, maggot-infested, wounded flesh. A hole was blown through my heart. My world darkened in that moment. The visioning of circling vultures above your son's rotting corpse does irreparable damage to a parent's psyche, a vision forever embedded in my mind. I continue to have constant nightmares of my son begging for his life, calling out to me for help as his skull is cracking open with each blow to his head. I blame myself for not knowing he was in danger. I am in constant pain, wondering if he died instantly or endured lingering torture. The what-ifs slowly kill me. My brother, Nick's uncle, once asked, what if I had done something differently to change the course of his life? He wishes he could have brought him to Wisconsin to work with him. We all wish that now. I touch his face every day on the photo that sits above my home office desk. I hold his ashes in my hands like I did when he was a baby. I cry constantly. I have the last shirt I ever saw on him sealed in a bag, tucked away in a box. I take out when I need him close to me, then quickly return it to preserve his scent as long as possible. On that awful day I was told of my son's murder, I collapsed on a bathroom floor, wailing and shaking as I began to vomit until my throat, mouth, and tongue were burned so badly it took weeks to heal. I experienced that again when you took the stand. My daughter coming to my aid to ensure I wouldn't take my own life that day. My life as I had known it was over in that moment. I will forever be grateful for my surviving child, Danielle, and my fiance, Ed, for just holding me for weeks, comforting me to help me get back on my feet, no matter how unsteady they made that possible for me. Then came the memorial for Nick. I will never understand how I gathered the strength to eulogize my son at his celebration of life service in front of 700 of our closest friends. In immense heartbreak, I survived yet another painful hurdle, another layer of unnatural grief as I prepared to attend the services in New Jersey for Megan, Gregory, and Margaret Brown. A new wave of grief for the Browns, Thomases, and Monahan families took hold. Just when I thought I couldn't endure any more pain, my heart and soul shattered all over again for Megan's brothers, Margaret and Gregory's surviving sons, and all their families. My pain was no longer just for the loss of my own son, Nick. We now shared in our losses and became the family of faith that we are today. Our darkest moments, our angels blessed us. Maggie's sons each were blessed with a baby. Gregory Aaron Brown and Jamie's beautiful baby boy Ryland came into the world on April 29th, 2016. The same day, 39 years earlier, my son Nicholas entered this world. A date we could all celebrate again, our tears replaced with warmth. We are grateful to share in the joy of these very special children's lives. Ryland and Olivia. Although this place and time does bring much joy, sadness creeps in. Maggie, Gregory, Megan, and Nicholas were denied this joy. They should have had to enjoy this time. I grieve they didn't get a chance to see these babies. It wasn't long before anger reared its ugly head in me. The day we cleaned out my son's home as I gathered his paint-splattered work shirts, another wave of grief flowed. Nicholas believed in working hard, never relying on others, and took pride in a job well done. I neatly stacked those shirts in a basket I would keep for 2 years before finally letting them go. Nicholas believed you reap what you sow. He couldn't stand a liar or a thief. If you didn't earn it, you don't deserve it. Nicholas would ask God often to bless the work of his broken hands, and his hands were broken. He couldn't have grasped anyone around a neck because he was scheduled to have surgery on his broken hands 2 weeks after you killed him. His hands were injured in a construction accident to which I attended. His lawsuit, and it's all on file in Pinellas County. You can pull it and look at it yourself. I settled that lawsuit posthumously in absentia on behalf of my child. I need a moment. Nicholas wasn't altogether perfect, but he learned from his mistakes and always took responsibility for them. I realized to get through this pain, I had a choice to either allow it to destroy me or to fight. I chose to fight. Through countless hours of trauma therapy, the best of friends in life, and support groups, I stand before you today proud of my precious son. I will continue to honor my child and his life, along with the lives of the Browns. We all struggle and suffer daily to put our feet on the floor, manage our grief, and somewhere in between to try to live again in our own life sentences. I pray that no other families have to experience the loss of a child to such evil, horrific demise, or in any way for that matter. Our families are now members of a club that we never wanted to be part of, and now can never leave. I believe now Nick may find peace in heaven with Megan and her parents. I deeply miss my beautiful son, the joy he brought to all of us, that beautiful smile, his explosive laugh, my best friend in life, his gentle kiss on my head, and hearing his last words of "I love you, Mama Duke." I am left with a broken heart to go on without him. I honor Nick's life by raising awareness for the children in our community about the dangers of domestic violence and hosting a fall festival each year in his honor, of which we had to cancel this year to tend to the important matter at hand. The festival is now Nick's legacy, and my goal to stop the madness. With the help of the hundreds of businesses Nicholas in our tight-knit Hudson community, families such as Get Hooked, my best friends, they were my best friends. Your employer was my best friend. Came to me and said, "What can I do? What can I possibly do?" I hate that my friends were put in that position, but I love them for asking. Get Hooked is one of our festival's major sponsors, by the way. We will continue to bring this festival to the children of Hudson completely free of charge to support our local Hudson domestic violence shelter through the donations raised. These are our friends from Nick's community who loved him very much and are more than honored to help us. My pain is not gone. I live the daily nightmare of my son's skull being bludgeoned to death. I feel and hear every one of those 21 blows delivered to Nick's head over and over, like a broken record, returning every time I close my eyes. My son's story is still not over, nor will it ever be. My wound is still open, fresh and deep. I still scream and search for my son. Nicholas will always be remembered as the kind and gentle soul he was. You now know my son, a hero to so many. I know with certainty Nicholas wouldn't have been anywhere else that fateful day. I would move heaven and earth to bring my son back. I've spent countless hours trying to will him back to life. I would gladly trade places with him. He should still be here. There is no greater pain than that of a mother who loses a child. My son was the first to touch my heart from the inside. This is who Nicholas Allen Leonard was to this world. My son, my gift to life. He was and always will be loved, deeply missed, celebrated and remembered until I take my last breath. I promise you, as I live out my own undeserved life sentence. Thank you for your time today.
Good afternoon, how are you all?
Good afternoon, Your Honor. We're not very good, frankly. My husband's coming with me. He'll be 79 next month. He's Matt Margaret Brown's father, as you know, and Megan's grandfather, and Greg Brown's friend and son-in-law. I have a prepared statement, of course, to help me, but I wanted to make sure that everyone knew some things about Megan and our relationship. We lived far away from them for many years, and Greg was wonderful enough to bring her and her mother and her brothers to Alaska to visit us. We had a fantastic time, and at 8 years old, Megan would sit in her grandfather's lap and read Robert Service poems to him with intonation. It was amazing. And she came again to Alaska in 2000, and she was very artistic. She drew a beautiful sketch of one of my dogs, and she also shared in our love of dogs. She actually was in the AKC first book of Dogs for Children, where she was photographed with one of our dogs, so we always shared that joy. But with the sketch, I bring it out on occasion, because she wrote almost a haunting message back in 2000. She wrote to Gramps and Grandma Linda, "Love will last, but I will miss you forever." I didn't know why she wrote that then. I still don't, except that I know that she was only 13, and it's proof that our love for them will last forever, and we are always going to miss them. We have the worst of life sentences. And then, please don't do that, honey. I know you're upset. My husband's, of course, terribly distraught. Margaret was his baby girl. He cradled her. Her mother cradled her. Her older siblings cradled her. Her big brother, he can hardly stand that he couldn't protect her from this violence. And I only knew her as an adult, so my grief is different, but it's still cutting and deep. And like some of the other professionals in this courtroom, I was a criminal defense attorney. I represented mostly murder cases, even mass murders. And I would die to protect that Constitution with my last breath. So I'm glad you got your due process. I'm even gladder you're getting your due punishment. It's not enough. I hope you find real justice when you get to that prison. And you'll be watching over your back the rest of your life.
Ma'am, let's.
There is not one of us, regardless of our role in this process, I apologize, Judge, who hasn't in private shed tears over the victims, even when you're the defense attorney. We're all humans in this. It hurts all of us. But unfortunately, this isn't just any case for me. This is my family. I wish the rules of evidence could have been thrown out the window. I wish they could have seen his Facebook page where he whited out his eyes and put fangs in his mouth. I wish they could have seen his Facebook page where he lies passed out with a weapon in his hand, some bottles of liquor, and a bundle of money. I wish they could have seen the real Adam Matos. My life has changed forever, our lives. The laughter that Mag and Greg and Megan gave us is gone. Their love's gone. There are gaping holes in our lives forever and in our hearts. We're also changed psychologically forever. We all have post-traumatic stress from this. That's a physiological as well as psychological event. I stopped biting my nails for the first time in 60-some years. I looked down, I got fingernails. Why? I was in shock for a long time. There are days when we feel absolutely nothing. There are days when all we feel is anger. There are days when all we feel is hate. There are just no days when I feel like I used to. They don't ever happen, and they're not going to. I have a hard time believing in love anymore, even though my husband and family and friends offer it to me all the time. The world feels crueler to me than I have ever felt before, and I've seen a lot of cruelty, but it's different. It doesn't get any easier to cope with. There's so much energy spent trying to cope with this. I also need to speak for Margaret, Mag, Greg and Megan too. The defense offered some postulate to the jury that Mr. Matos was afraid he was going to lose Tristan. There was never any thought in any one of their minds to take Tristan from him. As recently as several weeks before they were murdered, Margaret explained to me she did not want her grandson to be without his father. That's why they brought him to Florida. They didn't want Tristan to be without his father. I don't know where this crazy idea came from, but the whole thing is pretty darn crazy and sick. And what they experienced, something most of us are fortunate enough to get through life without knowing. Because of Mr. Matos, they knew the meaning of the word horror before they died. They likely saw someone they loved or knew slaughtered, and they knew they were about to die. They were terrorized by Mr. Matos. Evil, I believe I heard some discussion of evil regarding the aggravators. The thing about evil is that it's not just inside a prison. It lives amongst us, and sometimes we don't see it. They didn't, I didn't, and my husband didn't. 53 days before Adam Matos killed them, my husband and he and Megan shared a drink together. Megan and her mother sang a song a cappella to their grandfather and father with him in the vicinity. I don't know exactly how close. When I was there just 53 days before he killed them, I talked to him in that very same house. Just 53 days before he killed them, I hugged him in that very same house. Just 53 days before he killed them, I was inches from his face talking to him about Tristan and Tristan's needs. Love Tristan more than anything. That is such a bunch of baloney, Judge. And then 53 days after I talked to him like that, he slaughtered our family. He left them in a bloodbath. And he subjected this son of his that he claims to love so much that, thank goodness, my stepdaughter Rebecca and her other family members are loving and caring for, because he did not. I've heard people use the word win when they heard the verdicts the other day. There's no win here. There's no happiness. That's just not me. That's not who I am. And I guess something called justice happens, and I think that's kind of a concept none of us can really define. Because in the end, this is a human tragedy for everyone. Mr. Matos caused it to us. He caused it for himself, too. There are 5 lives taken away one way or another. That little boy has no mother, no father, no grandparents. And Mr. Matos made sure he has no father, too. And the rest of us will just try to continue in life. There are hurdles. I'm a survivor. My husband's a survivor. We just have a belief that when there are hurdles, you go over, under, around, or through them somehow. We'll miss them forever. We'll soldier on. And I can just be grateful that Mr. Matos, even though I might have wished for a greater punishment, is going to be punished. Thank you for listening, and I apologize if I got a little over the top at that one point, but my emotions are over the top.
I would like to say just a few words. My daughter Elizabeth has a young son about the age of Tristan. She had to stop him visiting Tristan because Tristan full well knows what happened on that fateful day. And he continually repeats, "My daddy killed my mommy." It was too bad he couldn't testify to the jury to that fact, but he's autistic and you don't know what impact it would really have on him. But he wishes, because he knows enough about Florida, that an alligator would eat Mr. Matos. I can't say much more. other than a little boy who has problems, had a whole lot more dumped on him by the defendant here, who is now not a defendant. He is the murderer. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
You should get a preacher's license.
Good afternoon. My name is Michael Shoup. I'll be brief. Rita Mae Brown, an American writer, once wrote, "One of the keys to happiness is a bad memory." I thought long and hard what I should say if I were given the chance to stand here. How would I speak? How would I react? I looked for inspiration in many places before coming across this quote. It immediately resonated with me as there can be no worse memory than the reason why I and many others are all before you today, which is the loss of 4 amazing people. For I have come to face an enemy, the ultimate enemy to my family, the defendant. For me, for my wife Danielle, none more so than the loss of Nick from our lives. Although this loss does not overshadow the loss of Meg and Greg and Maggie. It just cuts the deepest because we had the privilege and joy of knowing him, having not had the opportunity to meet the others before they were taken from this world. Nick was the older brother to Danielle's sibling, her best friend, her protector. If he were still here today, he would be my brother-in-law. I can only hope to fulfill those shoes in his absence, hoping he would approve of my efforts. I did not know Nick for very long, as Danielle and I had only been dating for just over a year before he was so wrongfully taken from our lives. Just before his murder, I had spoken to his father, Dan, and asked Dan for his permission to ask Danielle to marry me. I remember thinking to myself, Dan's permission wasn't enough. It would need Nick's as well, as I knew how much he meant to her and she meant to him. Thankfully, he happily gave me his blessing to me in a phone call, one that ended with us laughing about my proposal plans and him wanting to partake in the grand scheme I had in mind. This laughter was so true of Nick. Anyone who knew him would tell you the same. Laughter and a big grin. I truly don't remember a time where he didn't have a smile on his face, even the very first time I was introduced to him as his little sister's new boyfriend. I remember him eyeing me up and down for a moment, sizing me up, instantly deciding in his mind whether or not I was good enough for his sister. Just a few seconds later, we were sitting down, having a drink, his big smile across his face as we got to know each other a bit and enjoyed the family birthday party we were all at. I remember a sigh of relief at this moment, as the approval of Danielle's big brother was the one I was most anxious to achieve, and thankfully I did. Although I only knew him for the short time, the love he had for his sister, his mother Polly, his father Dan, and life were easily apparent. Just the way he smiled at them whenever he was around them, the way he talked about them, there was no mistaking how much he loved them. As much as he loved each member of his family, they loved him just as much in return. Over the past 3 years, there have been so many stories that have been shared about how much Nick is loved. Stories that have been shared over holidays that we've had to celebrate without him being with us. Stories told over events we've gone to without him being able to attend with us. Or stories shared at a moment's notice on social media without him being able to see them. We'll never be able to share our stories with him again. Nick was taken from our lives by a cowardly act, by a coward of a person. The loss of Nick has been a painful one, although the pain I suffer is nothing to that of his mother, father, and his sister, my wife Danielle. It's a pain she endures day in and day out, night in and night out. I couldn't begin to tell you the number of sleepless nights she has had, the panic attacks she has battled, the random thoughts of his passing which causes her a painful cry, or the nightmares she has suffered since her brother was stolen from our lives. Somehow she gets through this day by day. She's an amazingly strong woman, and it pains me for her to suffer like she does. As strong as she is, she decided against standing here for the off chance of showing any weakness, having me pass on some of her thoughts in her place. So I stand here today, trying to be her protector, as Nick would have wanted, in order for her to not have to tolerate the gaze of the person responsible for her pain. You do not get to take anything else from her or our family, and I will always be her protector on his behalf. For me, I handle and deal with the loss of Nick and the Browns in my own way, as I am also not immune to sudden thoughts about their murder, although mine tend to come while I am working. As you know, Your Honor, I am a deputy sheriff for this county, and I have been for 14 years, which calls for me to respond to those who call out for help, and in many cases, to the homes where someone has passed away. But many times they are not, with the odor of their passing in the air. I instantaneously think to Nick and the Browns when I detect this odor as is distinct, foul, and wretched. It is an odor I smelled at the Hatter's Drive address after the crime scene was released and the day the bodies were found, for I was there at the command post. As my mother-in-law testified, I had to identify my brother-in-law's body. Something I will never forget, and thankfully I have to bury that and bear that, and my family does not. Danielle and I traveled to the scene. We had to see there for ourselves where the murders took place. When I'm working and I come across a scene, I wonder if I'm walking into a similar situation as Nick and the Browns had to endure. If someone had suffered like they did when they were murdered in cold blood, the pain of losing them becomes fresh in my mind. Maybe one day this will affect me differently and won't be as painful. I think back to the quote I started with about bad memories and happiness. From this bad memory, there has been some happiness. We have come to know and love the many family members of Megan, Maggie, and Greg, and they've become members of our family. We all have become very close and have leaned on each other since our loved ones were taken, helping each other through this horrible ordeal as best as we all can, each in our own ways. I suppose we could thank you for our families coming together. However, I then think that this may have happened regardless, the way it was supposed to have happened, with Nick, Megan, Maggie, and Greg being here with us as well. We'll never know. The past 3 years have culminated in the moments we are in right now, and has been a very long road. Thankfully, justice has been served in part. For some, death for you cannot come quick enough. For others, a life in solitude never seeing the light of day is a more just punishment. In either way, it is not worth the price of our families have paid. Trading Nick, Megan, Maggie, and Greg for your life will always be the short end of the stick. You have no remorse for your actions, have not shown any remorse or regret since the day you were caught. This trial, which has been broadcasted to the world, has proven that. I have little doubt that all who have watched justice against you be served will agree with me, and many now share the disdain that my family have of you. Your life is now over. I take solace in knowing as your life comes to an end, whichever way it has been deemed to end, you will have had much more time to think and dread your impending final ultimate punishment. You will finally know suffering and pain as we have. John F. Kennedy wrote, "Forgive your enemies, but never forget their names." I promise you, as your life comes to an end, I will never do either. Thank you.